I'm Shotgun Spratling here with Dan Weber for USCFootball.com instant analysis after day 10, we believe, of fall camp. We're actually going to give you an insider's look from an outsider's perspective, since this is only my second day getting a chance to see the team and Dan's first time in 3 years. Dan, just first off, general observations on the differences watching a practice now versus 3 years ago.
And one of the first things I did was I counted the support personnel. There were 69 support personnel when they started on Dedeaux today. So not quite one per player, but close. And I think that's one of the, and I think to do all the things they want to do, you need a lot of people. You need a lot of people doing a lot of things. I don't think we ever saw that here. We didn't have, I go back to my memory of the pregame when they were playing Alabama, and Alabama set up with 9,000 people and all kinds of, preparation stuff, and USC came out and looked more like a high school, program in terms of the number of people and the number of things that they set up before the game, and you realize they're playing a different game at Alabama than, say, USC was playing back then. I get the sense you watch these guys, they're playing the same game. We talked to Barry Alexander, and he said it's pretty similar to, and he's at Georgia, and they're the team everybody, looks at and projects, and he said even with the physicality, he thought that, and he's here this year. He wasn't here last year. But all the talk about, this was a defensive day, but all the talk about the defense, probably the average person wouldn't be prepared to hear nothing but I know it was a defensive day to talk, but that's what Lincoln Riley talked about, and that's what dominated in the scrimmage. They came away from the scrimmage, you would not have probably expected. In normal years, you might expect the defense to be ahead, but they made it clear that the defense won pretty much all the battles in the first scrimmage. Again, probably not something you were prepared for. Looking at the players, they actually look leaner than I expected. Probably a good thing, because you look at the weight, chart and all that, they don't look like they're smaller, but they look leaner, and maybe that's comparing them, I was saying, to the coaching staff. It's the tallest coaching staff USC's ever had, and everybody runs everywhere. Like when they switch from Dedeaux to Howard Jones, and the offensive linemen go first, defensive linemen next, but the kids carrying the water bottles and the managers and all that, they're running right with them, and the coaches are running. And I thought it looks like it's a very efficient. What they're doing is efficient and serious. There's not a lot of noise. It's not like, let the fans make the noise. They this is not a bunch that's going to, be yelling and jumping up and down and screaming. But let their play do that. And I think when you talk to every one of them afterwards, that's kind of what they're saying.
Yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned, they had a scrimmage on Saturday. Defensive line won over the offensive line. That was the saying from Lincoln Riley. Though Sean Nua said we've already moved on, and the offensive line probably got the better of the defensive line today. But a couple of standouts that were mentioned today. Zion Branch had a pick six interception early, forced a fumble as well. Kid is going to make plays. He and his brother Zachariah made a couple nice catches today during the practice. We also heard that Tackett Curtis, another freshman, making some big plays in the scrimmage. The defensive line, Elijah Hughes, another freshman, got a lot of love from Sean Nua and Lincoln Riley. So seeing some young guys stand out, and that kind of goes back to what Lincoln Riley mentioned about some of the position battles. He said it's go time right now for a lot of guys, and guys that maybe last year had played a ton of reps may not be seeing those reps this year because of the depth they have and just the overall improved talent. And I think that probably stands out more than anything on the defensive side, though Lincoln Riley didn't necessarily mention that. But when you listen to some of those comments from Lincoln Riley, some of the defensive players and coaches we talked to today, what do you kind of make of the position battles and the talent that is on the defense this season?
Well, I thought one of the telling remarks that Lincoln made was, you can make a case for this guy first team, and you can make a case for him third team. And he talked about the reps that guys are getting first, second, and third teams. Well, you can't do that if you don't have the guys at the third team. You're not rotating first team to third team without having enough guys to do that. And he talked about I mean, it was interesting listening to all the defensive players, how much they talk about competition, but good competition, not where everybody's on the same team in the room and everybody feels good about how good somebody else is that came into the room, even if it's going to make life more difficult for them. But I think they're really into the whole competition thing, and of course that goes back to Pete, and that's what Pete did, was competing in practice to get better, to have fun while you're playing the games. And you just got a sense of there's a whole lot of competition going on. Again, you couldn't do that last year because you didn't have people to compete with people. But I think Lincoln is kind of preparing people for, you may have a lot of guys back, but they may not all be out on the field because you got other guys that are coming in and he said it's about, this is the last week. The only bad thing Lincoln said, and this is set off bells in my head, was he talked about mock game week. And I heard mock game week, and my hat started spinning around because mock game week has not a good, he didn't say it the same way, but he did say we're going to have a mock game, and this is the week you gotta. But putting mock game and week too close together got me going, thinking, not again. We had how many of those mock game weeks that you couldn't tell the difference between mock game week and the week before, week after.
So, some repressed memories there for Dan Weber. I spent most of my time talking with defensive line coach Sean Nua, and you talk about the position battles. I think that's the one that's probably the most telling. Last year, there weren't guys to cycle through. This year, if you're not on your P's and Q's, you're not making plays, you're not going to be out there. And I think, when I asked Sean Nua, I was talking to him about Keon Bars. He said, we challenged him last week. And Lincoln Riley kind of mentioned that last week as well. He's a guy that has shown flashes in his career, but he's got to get to that consistency level. So he's a guy that probably last year, he's coming in, he's going to start, and he's going to play a ton regardless, just because he's more talented than the other guys. But this year, he's on the same level, and he's got to make some plays, or else someone else is going to be in there. We talked to Jack Sullivan. You're talking about some of those freshmen that are already standing out a little bit too. So I think the defensive line is probably emblematic of the defense as a whole and the team as a whole. Just the fact that you're seeing a ton of competition there, and there's a ton of position battles that are still yet to shake out.
Yeah, I think I like the way they said it. They talked about they know they've got enough depth to go 3 deep, and they know the guys that are 3 are going to play. But he said what they're competing for is how much are you going to get to play. You're competing for playing time, and I like the way they, I just think they're putting it in the. Because when you listen to the players, you're hearing the same thing you're hearing from the coaches. And it's in their heads. They seem to understand clearly, this is how we do things. This is why we're doing them this way. This is what matters. And we know that there's a connection between what we do in practice and what we're going to do in the games. And it sounds like they've got an awful lot of those position decisions still to make. And again, you could be first team, you can be third team, you could be the same guy. And you got to decide, where am I going to end up on this? Am I going to be the first team guy? Am I going to be the third team guy? And you can tell it's so different from last year that everybody, players, coaches, are like, what a luxury to have this many people competing for this many spots. And it's a totally different feeling. And again, I go back to Mason Cobb. I just think he changes things in so many ways, and he definitely says, I feel like he was at the Utah game last year in person, saw that, and he talk about he'd already committed to USC, feeling your pain, and he said, Lincoln tells him every single day to the transfers, you weren't here last year, you got to do extra, you got to make up, that's your fault that we played like that because you weren't here. And I think that's a really good way of bringing those guys into, the motivation that you can get for the way the season ended last year, but not in a negative way, kind of more of a positive way.
And we'll have a lot more details on the Peristyle podcast this week about, position battles and some of those things. I mean, Lincoln Riley was asked what's kind of the most competitive position battle and rattled off 6 or 7, which tells you how much competition there is going on right now. But, Dan, I wanted to get your thoughts on the quarterback. The Heisman Trophy winner, Caleb Williams. You got a chance. This is your first practice seeing him. And, it's a little bit different than the game time when he does all the razzle-dazzle. but just his approach to practice, what kind of stood out there to you about Caleb?
Even before that, I wanted to mention in the post game with how many coaches and how many players, you have a returning Heisman Trophy winning quarterback whose name wasn't even mentioned. I mean, where else would you go that you could go through that many interviews, that many people, and he, I will say this, watching him come out, of Heritage and walking across the street, there's a seriousness about him. There's a look on his face that I was, probably overstating it, but that you didn't see on entire coaching staffs in the past here. You can see the wheels are turning. He's figuring everything out. I mean, and obviously he's figured a whole lot of things, not just football, out. And but what is so great is he won the Heisman for all the improvisational stuff that he did, excuse me, under pressure stuff. But the thing he does out here is he is an absolute robot. I mean, the ball is delivered on time, on target. Those guys are running their patterns and that. They know the ball's going to be right here, right on time, right on the step. And he is able to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. That probably gives him the ability on those times when he has to improvise and has to do things on the move and has to maybe even change his arm angle. He's so perfectly repeatable. I mean, if you were a major league pitching coach and you could get a pitcher to be able to repeat that throwing motion every single time, you'd be thrilled to death. It's fun to watch him just work and watch. You could say in a way it's that's kind of boring. Everything just no. When you look at the whole picture of it, to see a guy who can do what he does and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, it's beautiful stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty routine for Caleb Williams, which is why we actually haven't talked a ton about him throughout fall camp so far on this analysis, some of the Peristyle podcasts and stuff, because he just does it so consistently, and that's the thing the coaches are looking for all those other position battles is consistency. That was the big key word at Media Day. It's been the big key word that a lot of the coaches have used throughout practice camps, after practice camp sessions so far. So we'll see who can be the most consistent in the last couple weeks as this camp goes on, because game week is not very far away here. It seems like it should be farther away, but that week 0 game. But Dan, it's so great to have you come back and visit. Really appreciate you stopping by for Instant Analysis.
Every 3 years.
Okay, we'll get him in a pre-leap year every time. We'll get Dan Weber to stop by. But
although USC going to be visiting us a little bit, coming out our way.
Yeah, Dan and I were just ahead of the curve. Moving out to the east to prepare everyone. We'll have the fan guide on the places to eat and everything going forward. But Dan, any last thoughts and observations from you getting to check out practice?
Well, you talk about competition. I think the coaches were preparing us for the one position that they really don't know is wide receiver. I mean, there are just so many guys who do so many different things. And I think they're preparing us for maybe there will be some coin flips. They, as you said, they had 7. Lincoln had 7 different positions where he's talking about competition. But I think when he talked wide receiver, it's like, we've got a lot of guys that can play. I don't know. So that was fun. I do think there's a common purpose and there's a sense of what happened last year. It's kind of an embarrassment that they couldn't, they didn't get better and they didn't tackle people at the end and they didn't compete. And I think that is a motivating force that these guys, all the new guys that have just come here, you get a sense that they seem to know what does it mean for USC to football to be USC football. I think there's kind of a buy-in to what, many of the fans know, this is what USC football is. I get the sense from talking to those guys that they kind of do understand that. I think somebody's done a really good job in making that clear.
And last thing for me, we're talking to Barry Alexander about kind of that. He mentioned that Lincoln Riley and Kirby Smart are very similar. I asked him, does he feel like USC is on the right path to where Georgia was last year? And he said, for sure. So we'll see, how that path continues to wind its way towards maybe a college football playoff run for USC this season. They've got all the pieces. Now they got to put them together. For more, though, check out uscfootball.com. I'm Shotgun Spratling with the illustrious Dan Weber for today's Instant Analysis.